Welcome to Lunchtime Law on the Margaret McLean Show. I'm Margaret McLean, former prosecutor, trial attorney, law professor, and your courtroom translator. So join me at noon on weekdays and we'll talk law over lunch. And of course, be sure to subscribe and create a notification as a gentle reminder that I'll be doing the show at noon. So, you must be wondering what I mean by the title of this episode, The Dirty Math of Reasonable Doubt, and what I meant by that thumbnail text, the 5% loophole. I will explain, but first I'm going to provide you with a brief overview of the case for those of you who may be unfamiliar. So let's pull up a picture here. Anna Kepner, I feel so badly for her. So here she is. And of course, that's Timothy Hudson, the defendant on the right. All right. So Anna Kepner was 18 years old, a high school senior. She's a cheerleader and really just weeks away from graduation. She boarded the Carnival Horizon cruise with her parents, her 16-year-old stepbrother, who can be seen on the right, Timothy Hudson, the defendant, and her 13-year-old younger half-brother. So 3 teenagers shared one small cabin. If you've ever been on a cruise, that's very small, while the parents slept across the hall. You may be wondering, who were the adults on the trip? Well, we had Anna's father, Christopher Kepner, her stepmother, Chantel Hudson Kepner, and her paternal grandparents, Jeffrey and Barbara Kepner. It was a family trip with Dad's side of the family. What was supposed to be a fun family vacation, who doesn't like a cruise, turned into an absolute nightmare. On the morning of November 7th, 2025, crew members entered the kids' cabin, 8343, to clean it. What they found was horrifying. Anna's body was wrapped in bedding, partially shoved beneath the bed nearest the wall, and concealed with a box of life jackets. Federal prosecutors allege Anna was the victim of SA and M. And Timothy Hudson, who was 16 at the time, has been charged as an adult with first-degree M and aggravated SA. Back to the title of the show, of the episode, The Dirty Math of Reasonable Doubt. A prosecutor, especially here we have a federal prosecutor, is going to think that the defense strategy of creating that small percentage of reasonable doubt is dirty math, because they truly think they've built an ironclad case against Timothy Hudson. They believe in their witnesses, they believe in the forensic and DNA evidence. Timothy Hudson is their guy. But the defense, on the other hand, is doing the math. They know that the prosecution must convince the jury with anywhere between 90% to 99% certainty. That's the highest standard of proof in the legal system, requiring evidence so strong that no logical person could conclude otherwise. So the defense carefully does the math to chip away at that number. If they can create a 5% loophole, that may be enough to force a hung jury or even get their client off. So today, let's strategize like a prosecutor at first, and then take a look at what the defense will likely end up doing. We're lucky because in this case, we got a sneak preview because they recently had a detention hearing to determine whether the 16-year-old defendant, Timothy Hudson, should be off the streets and locked up as he awaits trial scheduled for September. So both sides revealed some of their cards. Now, first, I'd like to explain why this case is unique when it comes to jurisdiction. Meaning, why will the trial take place in Miami and in federal court if the crime occurred on a ship which is based in Panama. I mean, it sails under the Panamanian flag. So I don't have a hat, but I'm putting my professor hat on for this one. And I've created a few graphics to explain jurisdiction like I used to with my students. And I also want to explain the players involved in this case. So here we go. Let me present that for you, my jurisdiction piece. Anna Kepner's case falls within federal jurisdiction because the alleged crime occurred in international waters, placing it outside the legal jurisdiction of any individual U.S. state. Here, the crime took place on a cruise ship en route to Miami. The Carnival Horizon was traveling on the high seas, so the case is governed by federal law. Under U.S. maritime law, crimes committed on cruise ships departing from or returning to U.S. ports involving American citizens fall under the special maritime and territorial jurisdiction of the United States. No state court has authority over international waters. Thus, the FBI took over the primary investigation, and ultimately the case was sent to federal prosecutors. The case is being handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Florida under U.S. Attorney Jason A. Redding Quiones, and the prosecutor assigned to the case is Assistant U.S. Attorney Alejandra Lopez, and she's tough. And the defendant, Timothy Hudson, is being represented by Evan Call from the Federal Public Defender's Office. Since this is a federal case, there will be no cameras in the courtroom, but if you subscribe to my channel, I'll be updating you every day and providing legal analysis. Based on the FBI investigation, prosecutors presented the case before a federal grand jury in Miami, and they returned a superseding indictment against Hudson on March 10, 2026. He was officially indicted as an adult on felony charges of first-degree M and aggravated SA of his stepsister, Anna Kepner. The indictment and court records were kept under seal, and the case was not publicly unsealed until April 13, 2026, because he was only 16 years old. So what I'd like to do next is examine the prosecutor's evidence, and I'll go to my slideshow here. So I'm going to take you through the autopsy results first, and then go through their timeline, which I think is key. And in this slide here, right, the medical examiner, who is, I've got to put the glasses on, of course, Dr. Jonathan, Dr. Jonathan, I can't pronounce that last name, for the Miami-Dade Medical Examiner's Office arrived. So he did some of the autopsy. He did the initial part on the Horizon. So he went to where the victim's body was located. And one of the observations that he made was her underwear was twisted and bunched up inside of her. So we all know, even, if you have sexual intercourse, that's not a normal thing. It's evidence of some struggle and forced essay. You'll see her underwear was worn in an unusual manner. I didn't get into details because it's quite graphic. So the next slide is where the autopsy is performed, and you'll see here the bruising is significant. There's evidence of a struggle. There was bleeding in Anna's eyes, blood coming out of her ears. Ultimately, the prosecution will paint a gruesome picture for jurors. So you can see here, they talk about there's bleeding from small capillaries right here, and there was bruising found in the sides and rear of the victim's neck, specifically more on the left side, evidence of bruising in the ear that I told you about, And of course, they found this gray, viscous liquid that was present in her canal. And ultimately, that is tied to the defendant, which we'll talk about. But here, the doctor says that this particular type of bruising is indicative of possible mechanical strangulation. And of course, he does a rape kit takes the evidence under her fingernails. So next we have, this is an area, this is very interesting. I found that this particular slide shows something that the FBI is mentioned, the main agent and the prosecutors mentioned in this detention hearing. So the FBI describes an interview with Anna's ex-boyfriend, which of course is hearsay evidence, but this is not trial. So this is a probable cause hearing to determine whether Hudson should be detained or not. So the boyfriend would ultimately be called as a witness, and the judge would have to determine if the probative value of this particular testimony outweighs the prejudicial impact it would have on the defendant. And there was a FaceTime call, where the ex-boyfriend, what they typically did was it was kind of cute, they would call each other on FaceTime at night, and they would go to sleep together on FaceTime. So Anna fell asleep after they were talking, but the phone was still there, and the boyfriend hadn't fallen asleep yet. But as Anna's sleeping, he hears a noise, and he looks at the FaceTime, and he noticed that the defendant came into her bedroom and tried to get in bed with her. So he noticed, he heard a noise coming from Anna's phone. He looked, and he states that he had seen T, which is Timothy Hudson, trying to get into bed with her. He was kind of surprised and shocked by it and yelled through the FaceTime at Timothy. And then at that point, the defendant ran out of the room. So this is the FBI asked, did the ex-boyfriend tell you? Well, he said, did the ex-boyfriend tell you whether or not he informed the victim? And he did inform Anna, and Anna didn't tell her parents about it, which was really a shame. I think she should have at that point. But it goes to show that this is very weird behavior by the stepbrother. Why is he going into a room? Why is he trying to get into bed with her? The prosecution would ultimately like to use this testimony to show that the defendant has a propensity for violence, propensity to get into bed with her, and possibly to commit some sort of sexual act. So I thought that was key. Next, I want to be taught, before we get into the defendant's part of things, I'd like to get into the timeline, which is key. The timeline is key for the prosecution's case. And of course, I put the professor hat on again, and I'm explaining the timeline with particular graphics so you guys can see exactly what was happening throughout the evening here. Here's the timeline that prosecutors will rely on. On November 6, 2025, Anna left a family dinner on the cruise ship because her stomach was upset and her mouth hurt from her braces. At approximately 7:38 p.m., Anna is seen entering her cabin, 8343, and it's the last time she's seen alive, according to CCTV footage. Anna's stepbrother, Timothy Hudson, was already in the cabin when she arrived. According to CCTV, he entered at 7:35 p.m. According to the cameras in the hallway, at 7:51, Anna's 13-year-old half-brother enters quickly and leaves. At 10:13, Hudson looks left and right down the hallway, appearing to check if anybody is there. Then he walks out. At 10:23 and then 10:49, Hudson is observed entering and exiting the cabin approximately 2 times. Prosecutors are going to rely on this timeline. At 10:53, he's placing the privacy sign on the door. Why is he doing that? At 11:21, when the 13-year-old half-brother goes in, he doesn't see Anna at that point. He'll be a key witness. Now, Hudson comes and goes, and at 12:09 a.m., the 13-year-old comes back. He wants to go to bed. He's tired, but Hudson will not let him in. Why doesn't he want the kid to go in? Obviously, something's going on. Prosecution will argue there is some cover up going on. Maybe he doesn't have everything cleaned up. So then, this is very interesting. Between 9:26 and 9:52 the next morning, Hudson is seen exiting the cabin and taking a walk throughout the ship. The prosecution will present forensic evidence to show that Hudson and the victim's phone took the same route. Anna's phone connected with all the wireless networks or access points on that route. They'll coordinate the CCTV footage with her phone data to try and convince jurors that the defendant took her phone from the cabin and ultimately deposited it or disposed of it in the trash bin. The trash from that bin was collected, and an employee saw the phone and placed it in the lost and found. That will be powerful consciousness of guilt evidence against the defendant. And then, of course, at 11:24, some poor employee goes in to clean the cabin and discovers Anna's body beneath a bed that wasn't slept in and partially concealed behind some life jackets. And I think another interesting thing here is that at 11:27, there was all sorts of commotion outside the cabin because, of course, a body was found. So that's a big deal. Hudson walks by his own cabin without looking at the commotion. So what does that tell you? And I think that is something that's going to resonate with jurors. So that's the prosecution's timeline, pretty strong. But here's what the defense is going to attack. And like I mentioned, we had a preview. This is the transcript from the detention hearing, and Attorney Cohen is conducting the cross of the lead FBI agent. Cohen is a member of the defense team, too. So here we're talking about, based on the timeline that so this is the question by Cohen, the defense. Based on the timeline that we just heard from the government, almost 16 hours has passed between the time that the victim, who I'm going to refer to as Anna, just because it's simpler, sure, was last seen entering her cabin and the time that her body was discovered. So here we have a long period of time that is being questioned by the defense. Further, there is no direct evidence that has been developed during the course of your investigation that indicates the precise time of death. So that's another thing. Precise time of death is being questioned here, and the agent says no. So that's a little score for the defense. Also, there are obviously no cameras inside the cabin. That's another thing the defense is pointing out and will point out before the jury. So here, the next slide I think is interesting because Anna had an iPhone that she had all the time with her, and she also had an Apple Watch, which the government got some data from. And it's very important forensic data that will be used at trial. So here's what the defense is trying to attack. Well, again, my understanding, Anna also had an iWatch that monitored her heart rate and so forth. And that iWatch stopped working between the time period of 7:50 and 10. That's when the prosecution thinks she was unalived. And then it stopped monitoring her heart rate. So where's the watch? The defense is going to say, hey, where's the watch? You didn't find the watch. How is that? They had to admit, nope, we never found the watch. So that's another little way that they're chipping away at the prosecution's case. So in this slide here, the defense is making the argument that just because there's evidence that the stepbrother Hudson had intercourse with Anna, which again, it's his stepsister. I think that's strong evidence against him, but it doesn't mean that he actually got rid of Anna completely, made her unalive. So here's the bit of questioning. During the time of the autopsy, the assistant medical examiner was able to determine how long after the intercourse did death occur. No, they weren't able to determine that. So obviously, the evidence inside of Anna doesn't really indicate what time the death occurred, right? So they can't figure that out. So no, I'm not aware. That's the FBI agent right here. Question: was the assistant medical examiner able to determine whether the same person who was involved in the intercourse with Anna was the person who K'd her? Again, important question. Answer: I don't think they made that determination. Thank you, says the defense attorney. So that's something that will also be brought up to create reasonable doubt. The next slide, I think this is a pretty decent argument by the defense, a hole in the investigation, because no DNA was lifted from Anna's body. There was DNA found in her canal inside of her, but this is very interesting. I'm actually going to make this bigger so that you guys can read it. Get rid of me. All right. So, did they lift DNA from the areas of her body to indicate who may have strangled her? I'm not sure. Of course, I'm not sure. That's the answer of the FBI agent. Court, here's the defense. Again, you're the case agent. You would have been privy to that information if it existed. Yeah, I'd say so. And you don't know of any information to that effect. No, I thought you said there was an attempt made. I'm not sure if there was an attempt made. Well, you would be the one who would have told somebody to go ahead and get the DNA lifted from her body, from the neck area we're talking about. I believe the medical examiner does their own examinations. So here the FBI agent is pointing the finger at the medical examiner. So how they do it, if they tried to recover DNA samples from the neck or anything, that would be up to them. Point the finger. Have you ever heard of a medical examiner lifting DNA from a body? And here the FBI agent says, I don't know. That's not a great answer. How many homicides, defense attorney jumps on that. How many homicides have you investigated? So we investigate murders of U.S. citizens overseas. So we've investigated quite a few. I can't tell you a number right now. Okay, how many homicide investigations have you been the lead agent on? None. Not too good there. So again, the defense attorney is attacking the FBI agent's credibility. So in the next slide, I guess I could put myself back on here. The defense is speculating about the phone evidence, which I think is pretty strong evidence as far as the timeline is concerned. So with respect to the phone, this is the answer of the agent. I don't know. Oh, no, actually, this part is when the defense is arguing before the judge. And this is their explanation, and it's the same explanation that they will ultimately provide to the jury, most likely in closing arguments and possibly in the opening statement. With respect to the phone, I don't know. I don't know. Why would he have the phone? I don't know why it went into the trash can. I don't know. It's unclear. It is curious. Of course, it's curious. Like I said, there's lots of gaps and question marks that surround this. I would be speculating, Your Honor. But I mean, obviously, there are plenty of reasonable doubts about what happened here, and I would submit it doesn't rise to the level of probable cause either. Ultimately, the court is going to make a finding. So basically, the defense is trying to explain away the whole thing with the forensic data on the phone. And remember when Timothy Hudson left the cabin and went for a walk around the cruise ship near the trash can, and the phone was ultimately found in the location of or in the trash can by an employee who went through that trash. And it was placed in the lost and found. So the point here is, well, I know you have this timeline, but it really doesn't tell us anything. I don't think the defense has a strong argument right here. I think the prosecution's argument regarding the trail of the phone, the path of Anna's phone with Timothy Hudson, who's seen on CCTV, is pretty strong evidence. So here, the defense is attacking the FBI investigation, saying ultimately, I think it's clear there are lots of gaps and question marks about this investigation. And the government is filling those gaps and question marks with guesses and assumptions. And I'm sure you will hear this in the opening statement and the closing argument. It's the defense attorneys throw this in all the time, right? Now here, where it's the defense, the defense is playing the sympathy card. We'll be hearing this as well. So now the defense is arguing before the judge, saying, first and foremost, Timothy Hudson, his client, is a child. And they look at him, he's a child. From what I've been able to find, he is an honor roll student. That'll come out at trial. He's good at school, obviously education at this point, the past 3 months of his life. I understand he's been doing schoolwork at home. What's happening is very traumatic for everyone involved. Well, especially Anna, who is no longer here. It's a tragedy for everybody in this room. But basically he's trying to say, paint his client as some sweet, innocent kid, and he'll do that before the jury. But just because he's smart doesn't mean he didn't want his stepsister Anna so badly, and that he was obsessed with her, because the prosecution's going to paint that picture, that he just attacked her on this cruise. Now this is from the court. So the judge is analyzing whether this kid should be in jail as he's awaiting trial or off the streets. And I thought this was interesting because here's the court, the judge. The court finds that there is probable cause to charge the defendant as to the weight of the evidence involved. So he's saying, okay, you've got some strong evidence. However, this is key. With all due respect to the prosecutor, I don't know that I'd characterize it as a strong case. It is a case to be made, but also there are various defenses that may also be raised. So it is a much closer call. So basically he's saying that the prosecution doesn't have as strong of a case as they think they have. So it's also interesting because in this particular case, the judge initially listened to all this evidence from the FBI agent and the arguments from the defense, and decided that it was okay to have Timothy Hudson stay with his uncle, who had 2 young children, which I'm very surprised that the judge made that ruling to begin with. But then later on, he changed his mind. He flipped, which is really quite unusual for a judge to do that. But I think, in my experience at just studying this case, looking at all the evidence the prosecution has, I think the judge made a huge mistake by not putting this kid in jail as he was awaiting trial right away. He should be detained. He's detained in a juvenile facility, which is fine, but why on earth the judge had this kid with an ankle bracelet living with 2 young children? One, I believe, was a 7-year-old girl with a propensity for violence like this and possibly SA. So the judge changed his mind, thank God, and now Timothy Hudson is in jail awaiting trial, or in a juvenile detention facility. But at least he's off the streets and he can't harm anyone else. Ultimately, it will be very interesting to see what developments are made, but I think we did get a preview here, and I will be covering this case in the future. I also want to talk about tomorrow at noon. So what I'm trying to do is be consistent here so that you guys can we can talk law and make it somewhat casual. Maybe we'll have a sandwich. I'm not good at eating and talking, so maybe I'll get better. But it's kind of a nice time. You guys take a break, listen to a little bit of law. What I'd like to do is talk about some of the current events happening in the law, and then pick a case. And tomorrow, I'd like to talk about um, why the parents aren't are they criminally culpable? And could they be civilly culpable? And would there be any civil liability on behalf of the cruise company, Carnival Horizon? So let's go over that. I'd also like to talk about the Lindsay Clancy case. There are a lot of issues there regarding mental illness, and it's sad 3 children died as a result of what Nancy, what she admits that she did. So I don't want to get it into detail, but in the meantime, please subscribe, press the notifications, and I'll see you tomorrow at noon. Enjoy your lunch and enjoy the rest of this beautiful afternoon. We have a beautiful afternoon here in Boston. And hopefully